And our first speaker this morning is Mr. Jesse Ausubel. He's the Director Program for the Human Environment at Rockefeller University. Jesse Ausubel is, as I just said, that. He is recognized for qualifying the declining materials intensity of modern economies and developing the concept of dematerialization and the broader field of industrial ecology, which fosters radical reductions in waste and precise use of resources. Impressed in the early 1990s by slowing growth of cropland, he asked, how much land can 10 billion people spare for nature? That question has led to a large body of work on changes in land use and land cover and quantifications of potentials to reduce resources demanded by agriculture. Recent essays explore peak farmland and the prospect for land sparing, meat and potatoes and the American landscape, and the rebound of nature that land sparing allows. Professor Ausubel co-founded the Barcode of Life Initiative, which provides short DNA sequences that identify animal, plant, and fungal species. He also served as founding chair of the Encyclopedia of Life project to create a web page for every species. Author or editor of 150 publications, Mr. Ausubel is the University Fellow of Resources for the Future, an adjunct scientist at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, and member of the U.S. Council on Foreign Relations, where he serves on the board of the magazine Foreign Affairs. He serves as vice chair of the Richard Lounsbury Foundation, the first philanthropic foundation to support Wikipedia. A deepwater lobster, Dinoceles ausubeli, is named in his honor. At his country home in Massachusetts, where he has about 40 fruit trees, he traps skunks and raccoons every summer. And Mr. Ausubel was one of our speakers a few years ago and did such a great job. We are very, very honored to have him back for a repeat performance. Jesse?
Thanks, Dale. Okay. Thanks to the UPGA, Dick and Dale and everyone, and the UPGA's partners for allowing me to participate in the 2018 summit. I attended your 2014 summit in San Antonio and learned a lot, including that you're hardworking, good-humored people searching for smart ways to prosper. Thanks for coming here this morning instead of heading over to the Magic Kingdom or to Typhoon Lagoon. Now, during the next few days, I also look forward to learning a lot from you about blackleg and powdery scab, about high-performance F1 hybrids, what these mean for seed potatoes, about certification, mentioned already, about how Amazon's entry into the food business could affect potatoes. The title in the program of my talk is Peak Farmland, as Dale mentioned. I've given it a subtitle, The Potato and the Prius. Now George Martin here has a Prius, I learned. That's part of the reason. But the Toyota Prius was the first mass-produced hybrid electric vehicle, and for about 20 years now has ranked profitably among the cleanest and most efficient, reliable cars sold in the U.S. Now, my own message will be about resources. I believe in the 21st century we have a new reality of resource use, and that potato growers can match well with it. The term resources embraces four great categories. The first is the traditional one that we usually think of, natural resources, water, energy, land, and minerals. The second is labor, the human resource. And the third is information, now often measured in bits and bytes and bandwidth. The fourth is capital, which we can think of as both money and machines. My view is that slowing population growth, moderate economic growth, changes in consumer taste and behavior, and technical progress in both widgets and systems are combining to create a new reality of resource use. And that new reality includes lightening use of natural resources in the US and globally as efficiency decouples outputs from inputs. My view surprises many people who worry about adequacy of arable land, water, and fertilizer. The new reality also involves labor sparing, less need for lots of people and hours of their work. In contrast, the new reality of resources requires heavier use of information. Think how much information a self-driving car will need, or think of the global market news that participants in the potato industry already use to make their decisions. The new reality also implies a large continuing role for capital and machines. A combine replaced the stoop labor in the first slide, and now farmers invest in drones, and so does Amazon. The new reality is characterized by sensors, precision, autonomy, coordination of logistics at huge scales, and sharing to boost asset utilization. Potato Expo will display these and other technologies and systems. In my scenario, advantage will accrue to those who develop and adopt the new technologies, and especially those who integrate and regularly refresh them. A way to summarize the new reality is more bits and capital, and fewer acres and hands. Cheap labor means little. A risk is fragility of finely tuned systems. Let me walk you through the scenario with some examples. First, a couple of examples from natural resources, stuff, such as metals and minerals. In this slide, you see two magnets. Consider the miniaturization of magnets that's occurred over the last decade or two. New magnets, like the small one, are salted with elements like neodymium, and they're equally powerful as a magnet that was 20 or 30 times as large. Consider telephones. Those of you my age and older will remember the old black Bell telephone. It weighed more than a 5-pound bag of potatoes. Your smartphone has about 1/20th the mass and handles hundreds of times more data, less copper, less plastic, and it also has batteries to provide autonomy. Now consider all the things your smartphone can do. Dale mentioned dematerialization. Your smartphone replaces everything from a compass to a newspaper to an alarm clock. A big dematerialization or decoupling of stuff and services. Now, both producers and consumers play important parts in decoupling the economy and natural resources. While the world economy grows at about 3% per year, the red line on the top of GDP, food supply grows slower. Yet, during this time, world hunger has halved over the past generation and owes mainly now to lack of income, not to lack of calories and protein, which in fact abound globally. More affluent people download a lot more videos, but they buy only a little more food. And growers have been especially smart about getting more crop, more product, without using a lot more input. Consider the decoupling of bushels of American corn from American land. Land farmed equaled American corn harvested until about 1940. And then they went in very different directions. So we're using about the same acreage as we did in 1920, even 1910, and the total production has multiplied. In fact, yields have grown crazy high. In 2017, Virginia corn grower David Hula, not even in Iowa or Illinois, set the world record, announced just a couple weeks ago, with 542 bushels per acre, even approaching the tons per hectare of an experienced potato grower. Mr. Hula planted densely, monitored closely, and optimized tightly. A lot of capital, a lot of information. Top USA corn yields, the top line in this chart for the state of Iowa, are only about half of the records that people like David Hula are now setting. These are Iowa master growers. And the Iowa master growers, in turn, are about double the USA average, the middle line. And those are, in turn, about double the world average, the bottom line. And this means that headroom abounds for growers worldwide still to lift yields and thus spare a lot of land. The same story, obviously, would be true for potatoes or soy or others. Now, until about 1970, Americans grew our economy by using more inputs. Here you see 9 basic commodities in the used in the U.S. from the year 1900 through 2010, with 1970 as the reference year when each of them, I say each of them used 1 unit of that commodity. And if you were in 1970, looking backwards, you'd see things going up and up and up, steeply. Up to 1970 or so, we kept using lots more stuff whenever we wanted to grow our economy, as corn growers used more land up until 1940. No wonder around that time lots of folks worried about resource shortages and associated limits to growth. Between 1970 and 1990, use of inputs like steel and copper slowed. And since 1990, as you see in the right-hand part of the chart, the use of all 9 of these commodities have plateaued or even fallen, even plastics and aluminum. And of course, there are a variety of reasons. For example, emails and e-books have softened demand for pulp and paper. Now, the declines in phosphate and potash in the previous chart stimulate us to look more closely at agriculture from 1900 up to 2015, again with 1970 as the reference year. And recall first the output. Here, these are 8 products, 5 plants, corn, soybeans, wheat, potatoes, and cotton, and 3 meats, chicken, pork, and beef. In dark green, we see King Cotton. Cotton was America's largest export from 1800 right up through the year 1937. It fluctuated a lot within a market of unchanging size. The 4 food plants, the corn, soy, wheat, and potatoes, grew steeply. And so did the 3 meats up to 1970. Beef in pink saturated first around 1970, and wheat in purple saturated about 1980. Pork in turquoise and potatoes, light green, seem to have saturated around 2000. But corn, soy, and chicken continued to soar. We're now in the era of King Corn, or King Chicken, as I'll say a little bit more. Now consider the inputs. These were the outputs. Now consider the inputs that were used to produce the farm products, including cropland, water, and 3 forms of fertilizer, nitrogen, potash, and phosphates. Cropland in blue, total cropland in the U.S. has been flat for about a century. Americans moved farming from low-yielding states like Connecticut to high-yielding ones like Iowa, but we did not use more land net. Into the 1970s, however, we did use a lot more fertilizer and water. You see the almost vertical lines for some of the inputs up to 1970. But something then happened in agriculture, as in other economic sectors. And the most accurate label, I think, is precision agriculture. American farmers started to favor deploying more information, like better weather forecasts, while lessening the intensity of use of the inputs, the natural resources, even water. The water story surprises everyone in America. Here you see 2 lines, one of which the darker line is the absolute use of water in millions of gallons per day in the U.S., and the line that starts slanting down is the millions of gallons per day per dollar of GDP, or the intensity of use of the water. And you see that between 1975 and 2010, water withdrawals in the USA actually fell during a period when you all, and farmers, grew 300% more corn and soy, 60% more wheat, and 25% more potatoes. And there were 105 million more Americans demanding goods and services. Earlier, we saw the astonishing growth of corn yields. Corn has succeeded brilliantly on the demand side as well as the supply side. After being creamed and popped, corn multiplied its use by becoming meat for several decades, and then fuel in red in this chart around 2000. Corn growers were very effective and lucky with their timing because, of course, a little after the year 2000, fracking transformed our view of the domestic abundance of gas and oil. An area the size of Iowa or Alabama now grows ethanol. Similarly, soybeans became chicken. Americans eat little tofu. Poultry, in fact, has overtaken swine and cattle as the machine of choice to convert grain to meat. Some commentators attribute the success of poultry to concerns about health and about red meat. But I think farmers understand that a chicken is a much more efficient machine than a pig or a steer. It matures into a broiler in 6 weeks, and only a small fraction is bone or cartilage. Like an efficient car, like a Prius, a chicken gets 60 miles to the gallon of feed, while a pig gets 30 and a steer about 12. No wonder world farmers now grow about 20 billion chickens. American meat consumption grew from 15 million tons in 1969 to about 24 million in 2014. However, because of the rising yields of soy and corn, more efficient meat machines, and better animal breeding and nutrition, we estimate the amount of cropland used for raising meat fell by nearly a third, around 9 million acres, about the size of Maryland. This occurred over American decades famous for burgers, sausages, and fried chicken. It's worth spending a minute now on uses of new biotechnology. To me, genetic modification is a form of information, a super precise and microscopic one. Although journalists report that many people worry about GMOs, in fact, adoption has been steady. You see the rising green line for the world, about 185 million acres. The red line is developing countries. The blue line is industrial countries. So while there's a lot of, let's say a lot of noise about this, the actual behavior has been much more steady. Now, a lot of attention to GMOs has related to corn, but soybeans are the crop most often modified. Here you see soybeans on the left, cotton, maize, and canola. And about 78% of all the soybeans now grown globally are GMO. Few chickens grow without soybean feed, so most all chickens that we eat result from GMOs. In fact, you could say the soaring popularity of poultry demanded GMOs, or more accurately, abundant, low-cost soy. So when asked for an example of a GMO, I don't point to a plant, but I point to a chicken. Now, what's my global picture of land use and land cover? I believe we are at peak farmland in the US and globally, even with growing population, even if we add another couple billion people and more money in the wallets. I believe yields will rise faster than demand, efficiency will win, and a lot of land now used for crops will be spared for other uses. In green, you see on this chart the global cropland up to 2009 and projections we made in 2010 of a base case and then an alternative steeper case when yields rise even faster and so other changes occur. On the right, you see two pictures, one of abandoned corn land in Arkansas, reverting to woodland, and above that, a farmer using a drone at a vineyard in Northern California. So I don't think that this that the peak farmland means deprivation. I think it means satisfaction of a larger, wealthier world that is doing things much, much more efficiently. So we can have peak oil, we can have peak water, we can have peak farmland, peak nearly everything while we get more services at the same time. Soaring information, heavy demand for capital. Now, the central reason in our sector, again, is precision agriculture. And here you see an example of a field monitored by sensors on a drone, determining exactly how much water, fertilizer, and pesticide to apply to a field. So we can apply less water, less fertilizer, less pesticide if we have better information about the state of the soil, weather forecasts, and so forth. But we need to take care at the same time, I would say, not to build brittle farms that fail if the internet is down. Now, the result of all these changes in forestry as well as in farming is that the biosphere is actually growing globally. This world map shows you that the world is actually getting greener. A global greening is occurring rather than a browning. You see some red dots. Those are areas where woodlands or foliage cover have shrunk since the early 1980s. And in green, you see areas, in fact, where the Earth's cover is increasing. And again, rather to people's surprise, the northern Amazon, the south of the Sahel in Africa, much of Central Asia, even parts of India and China, have been greening as this process that I've been talking to you about spreads around the world. So now in some areas, forests are still being cleared, southern Amazon, parts of Indonesia, but globally, farmers are sparing land and allowing it to become wilder again. And potatoes exemplify this set of trends. This slide shows your own achievement from 1950 to 2017. In red at the top, you see yields. You've tripled yields, and you've doubled production in blue in the middle, while you've reduced harvested area by 30%. If we consider just the past 40 years, American potato farmers grow about 40% more tons while planting about 20% fewer acres. Success of potato growers at lifting yields can affect many landscapes. Idaho, of course, grows about a third of American potatoes. Colorado, about 12%. Washington, Wisconsin, Maine, Florida, here, of course, the Canadian provinces as well. So I would say that UPGA members and associates likely have a lot of land to spare in all these states. Moreover, because many potatoes are irrigated, fewer acres mean more water in rivers and wells. So I think UPGA members likely also have many gallons to spare, like a Prius. Well, how to prosper? Like corn and soy farmers, potato growers need to think about new markets. I doubt we will feed potatoes to chickens or catfish. Horses like potatoes, but I don't think the global horse population is going to return to the America had 22 million horses in 1900. I don't think we'll go back to those levels. That means we need to focus on humans and Asia, home of many humans enjoying more calories. The next slide shows the story of per capita corn consumption in Japan, Korea, China, and India. Corn saturated in Japan in red and Korea in blue, but not yet in China in green. In India, corn, of course, has never caught on because corn is a proxy for beef, which most of the Hindus don't eat. Here you see the beef situation in Asia. Even in Japan and Korea, again, you have a plateau or falling. The Chinese beef eating will rise, but the orange line on the bottom, the Hindu culture of India, the beef consumption is actually falling. Here is soy. The Japanese and Koreans, even before the efficient chicken, seemed saturated on soy, but the Chinese have soared and Indians are rising. KFC now has more stores in China, 4,563 stores, than in the United States. There are still only 372 KFCs in India. As in other industries, Asian markets offer great growth prospects. UPGA members will benefit from knowing the word for potato in Hindi, aloo, and in China, to do. US and Canadian production could resume rising to meet a larger fraction of growing global demand. Here on the top you see in blue the global potato production, which has been rising, and in red the US production, which rose up until about 2000 and has been flat since then. But obviously, again, the domestic demand is not likely to change much, so the question is, can we, North American growers, I'll say, gain a larger share of the world market? Now, while researching new products and products with different attributes is good, in the short run, new products will attract small revenue. In 2014, fingerlings were less than 1%, and purple blue potatoes about 1/10% of production, though a larger fraction at small farmers markets, where farmers smartly earn $5 a pound for novel-looking potatoes. Potatoes called organic get about 2% of the market. The $4 billion potato sector needs big product ideas comparable to French fries and potato chips, which surged in popularity in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. In his 1992 autobiography, Grinding It Out, Ray Kroc, the founder of McDonald's, admitted that he was not in the hamburger business, he was in the French fry business. His real genius was finding a way to charge a lot of money for a potato. He rode a wave of social change. The wave affected not only what, but how and where we eat. In 1900, 50% of an American's income went to food, while in 2012 it was less than 10%. But an American adult now goes to a restaurant about 200 times per year. Restaurants get about half the US food dollar. Of the $620 billion Americans spent in 2012 on food, only about $175 billion, less than a quarter, went to producers. Of the dollar I spend at Kroger's or Albertsons or Whole Foods or McDonald's, 23 cents on average goes to the farmer or fisher. About 8 billion pounds of potatoes go to restaurants, 80% to chains, and only 1 billion pounds to retail. And contrary to wishful thinking, all vegetable consumption in North America has been falling, including potatoes. I learned in San Antonio that Canadian vegetable consumption had declined about 40 pounds since 1987. And all produce is only 12% of grocery sales. 10-pound bags of potatoes are selling a lot less than even the 5-pound bags. And a reason is that consumers now suffer, or feel they suffer, time poverty. Total average American adult food preparation now is only about 20 minutes per day, and shopping 15 minutes per day. And if Amazon has its way, maybe it'll be less than that. Preparing fresh potatoes and the rest of a meal within 20 minutes is not easy. Convenience is winning, and for the potato, this means encouraging apps for smartphones like those now spreading fast for delivery of pizza. It's no wonder people want to be chefs or restaurant managers. There are now 1 million food service establishments in the US. In contrast, according to the 2012 Census of Agriculture, the US now has about 660,000 real farms with sales of 25,000 or more, or 180 acres or more. Moreover, in 2012, the average age of an American farmer was 58, and about 2/3 older than 55. But let's not be glum about age or about labor sparing. I've talked a lot about sparing of natural resources, and the new economy spares labor too. During Christmas, many people in this hall probably added an intelligent personal assistant like the Amazon Echo to their home. Robots and mechanization will replace or diminish many occupations. But for agriculture, the story is old hat. This slide shows the steep decline in American farm employment from 12 million to 4 million in the 20th century, and it's halved since then. And these declines were mainly associated with tractors and other devices multiplying horsepower. Now we have the diffusion of artificial intelligence, sensors, drones, and a prospect of farming without farmers. Someday, well-capitalized new systems with reliable software may permit farming without farmers. But for the next few decades, growers will be farmers, not robots, and ones who wisely and effectively manage information and capital. With regard to age, 60 is the new 50, or maybe even the new 40. America's population has never been older if we count the years since birth for the average American. Symmetrically, if we count the distance in years from death, the average American has never been younger. And with new knees and hips, we can keep skiing as well as farming. As I've suggested, the new reality of resources contains good news for the outdoors. For 10,000 years, growing more food used more land. In recent decades, rising yields have allowed us to pass that peak of farmland. And the land now needed to produce the calories to feed a person for a year is about 1/5 of a hectare, or half an acre, and shrinking. Here you see a calculation we made of the average land globally used to feed a person, and you can see it was rising up until the middle of the 20th century here. And then with the explosion of yields of potatoes, corn, and soy, rice, wheat, it's dropped and dropped, and there on the very lower right you see that if everybody in the world farmed like the Iowa master or like David Hula in Virginia, the amount of land that we'd need to feed a person would be a tiny fraction of what it is today. And in fact, the continents produce a global surplus of calories and protein, and you could say these permit or cause obesity and ethanol. Now, while I've emphasized yields, I'd like to include a few words about food waste. Until recently, and even today in poor nations, gleaners filtered fields for the last few potatoes and other crops. While rats in poor storage still cause food losses in poor countries, rich countries discard a scandalous fraction of what we grow. Recent studies suggest that 1/3 of food purchased both by restaurants and households is discarded. Reducing such food waste is another way to spare land for nature, and perhaps the internet will provide means. Lots of land now used for farming and forestry can become wilder. Precision agriculture and wiser diets for people and for cars create wide prospects for rebounding nature. Potato growers can meet more market demand and do more for the environment. The extensive land farmers own and manage is an increasingly flexible asset, and the water too. While understanding how potatoes differ from other major crops matters, my overall argument is that farming resembles other modern industries: more bits and fewer kilograms. Drones, sensors, and autonomy are the central subjects of discussion in Silicon Valley, the Pentagon, and Potato Expo. While the oil and salt associated with large orders of fries might not be healthy, potatoes are a deeply green vegetable in the sense of resource sparing. Potato farmers typically grow 3 to 4 times as many tons per acre as corn growers grow corn. For calories, the ratio is smaller, but still, from the perspective of acres saved, potatoes are a deeply green crop. Land sparing makes the potato an ecological champion. Let's help consumers understand that the potato and the reliable, efficient green Prius and the high-tech world of which it is a part have a lot in common. But the potato tastes better. Thank you.